So let's talk about the Space Marines with access to all the toys they could possibly want. Let's see what we can do with Vanguard Veterans. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the tactics and strategy focused Warhammer 40k channel, where we're back for another Space Marine unit review. We've been going through every datasheet in the new Space Marine Codex, and seeing what we can do to make the most out of them on the battlefield, and it's time to put the Vanguard Veteran Squad under the microscope. In this video we'll take a quick look at their datasheet, have a think about all of the myriad of options they have, look at some obvious synergies and buffs that we can improve the unit with, and have a chat about some of the ways that we can field them on the tabletop. In the background, the Vanguard Veterans are drawn from the chapter's first company, and naturally they include some of the most skilled hand-to-hand fighters in the whole chapter. With access to the chapter's armoury, they carry a wide variety of arcane and powerful weapons into the fray, often wielding artifacts that date back to the chapter's founding. In battle, they're used as the ultimate tip of the scalpel, delivering an enormous amount of pressure to the foe where they are at their weakest, before bounding off, borne on jump packs, to deliver the Emperor's vengeance to some new and terrible foe. So let's see how this translates to the tabletop. Vanguard Veterans are an elite squad for Codex Space Marines. At base you buy them at a squad of 5 Marines, 1 Sergeant and 4 Veteran Space Marines. At base they cost 14 points per model, so the squad of 5 will cost you 70 points if they don't have jump packs. If you do field them with jump packs, they go up to 17 points per model, so that same squad of 5 will set you back 85 points. They have a decently impressive stat line: base movement 6 or 12 with the jump pack, weapon skill and ballistic skill 3, strength and toughness 4, 1 wound, 2 attacks, leadership 8 and a 3-up save. The Veteran Sergeant is a real beast in close combat because he has 3 attacks base, and that's not even accounting for shock assault. This makes the Veteran Sergeant an incredibly good place to put a special close combat weapon if you're thinking about buying in a Thunderhammer or something. At base, each model's equipped with a bolt pistol, chainsword and frag and crack grenades, and as we mentioned, they have access to a whole ton of options. Firstly, every Marine, including the Sergeant, has the option to take a Storm Shield. At just 2 points per shield, this is an incredibly powerful option. Having a 3+ invulnerable save really turns these guys from being a very fragile Marine unit to being something that the opponent actually has to dedicate a lot of firepower to shift. Getting that 3-up save no matter what your opponent shoots at you is very powerful, and for just the 2 extra points I would buy this on every single model, presuming I'm not wanting to use both of their hands to equip different close combat weapons. Basically every Marine, including the Sergeant, can swap out their bolt pistol and chainsword for 2 options from either the pistol or the melee weapon list. The way that this is worded means that you can take 2 options from the melee weapon list, or you could take 2 options from the pistols list, or you could have one of each. If you take a Storm Shield, then you have the Storm Shield and then you take one of the options from the pistol or melee weapons list. This means that they're an incredibly versatile unit. Melee weapons include chainswords, lightning claws, power axes, power fists, power maws, power swords and thunderhammers, and the pistols list is bolt pistols, grav pistols and plasma pistols. In addition, instead of those options, the Sergeant can take a relic blade. The relic blade is strength +2, AP -3 and damage D3, and it costs 9 points, the same as a power fist. So it's quite well balanced. It doesn't suffer the -1 to hit that the power fist has, but you're only strength 6 rather than strength 8, and otherwise the weapons are exactly the same. The power fist is going to do you better against anything that's toughness 7 or 8, and the relic blade in general will do you better against anything toughness 6 or lower. So it's kind of your choice which targets you'd like to be better at fighting. But there are both decent options because of the Sergeant's 3 attacks and shock assault. Another thing that's worth noting with these wargear options is that you can take a fancy power weapon of some sort and also take a chainsword, or technically you have the option to take 2 chainswords as well. Because the chainsword's extra attack rule functions separately from the model's main weapon, this means that you could get the additional attack from the chainsword even as you fight with a different weapon, so you'd have some decent anti-armor power saved from power fists and a few extra chainsword hits to thin out infantry at the same time. You could go for a very mad and cheap build with the Vanguard Veterans, which is to equip them all with 2 chainswords, putting each model up to 5 attacks on the charge with shock assault. This will probably look a little bit silly modelling wise with 2 chainswords each, but there's no doubting that they'd certainly make a massive impact on any enemy infantry squads. I know that whether or not you can do this seems to have been debated on the internet a bit, but rules as written, it seems to me that it's an option, and I have had this confirmed from someone else on the Chainswords quick tip video I made, that he's been able to run these in multiple tournaments, checking it with the tournament organiser each time. So thanks for that, whoever it was who posted that comment. All of these options mean you really could tailor up your Vanguard Veterans to be just the tool that you want them to be. If you want them to be a lightweight anti-infantry blender, give them all the 2 chainswords and enjoy potentially 50 attacks on the charge. If you want them to be similar but a bit more durable, you could have a chainsword and storm shield, have 40 attacks on the charge, and also have that 3+ invul save. You could augment that same squad by throwing in 2 or 3 thunder hammers instead of a few chainswords, so then you've got a unit that will shred hordes and heavy hitters pretty reliably. And of course you have the option for everything in between. You could go nuts with power swords and have a unit that's tooled up for taking out elite infantry. And finally, if you really did want to go absolutely mad and ramp up the damage output to insanity levels, you could give every single veteran a storm shield and thunder hammer and be tooled up to smack knights into the next millennium. That full squad should do 20 wounds to a knight on average dice, and that's assuming you have no buffs at all and aren't in the assault doctrine. Of course, you will be paying through the nose for that, as they're 35 points a model. Essentially, you can invest almost as much as you want in these, but bear in mind that even with the storm shields, they are a relatively fragile unit, and concentrated anti-infantry firepower will have you failing those 3-up saves. For all of these builds, I've been assuming that we're taking the jump packs. You do of course have another option, which would be to not have the jump packs, and perhaps deploy these guys turn 1 via drop pod. This could be a very powerful option if you have some way to boost their charge, say the White Scar stratagem to allow you to roll 3d6 and pick the 2 highest for your charge range. You could easily get a Vanguard Veteran squad into the enemy lines on turn 1, no questions asked. Of course, drop pods do cost a lot of points, so there are benefits and drawbacks to this. One model in the squad can also take melter bombs, a cheap 5-point upgrade that allows you to throw a melter bomb at a vehicle within 4 inches. It's got quite a powerful shot, strength 8, AP -4, d6 damage, and rerolls wounds against vehicles. It's only 5 points, so it could well be worth it, but you have to bear in mind whether or not you're actually going to get to throw it, because ideally most Vanguard Vet squads are going to be dropping in from reserve, and that will mean that they have to be 9 inches away from enemy models, so you won't typically get the chance to throw it on the turn that you come in. This could be more useful for things like Raven Guard, who have some Vanguard Veteran shenanigans they can do, but we'll get to that in a second. Like most Space Marine squads, they have the Angels of Death special rule. Shock Assault is the biggest thing that benefits them. Combat Doctrines could also help if you get to the Assault Doctrine, and Vanguard Vets are one of the squads that will really benefit from that extra AP -1, particularly if you are going mad with the chainsword attacks. They also have the Combat Squad special rule, allowing them to split into 2 5-man units before the game starts, if you were fielding a squad of 10 of them. I wouldn't typically bother myself, I'm afraid. And they have the Jump Pack Assault rule, which is their rule where they can start off the battlefield and come down turn 2 or turn 3, obviously provided they have jump packs. So that's the summary of the unit. They're an incredibly hard-hitting Space Marine melee unit, with low durability if they don't have storm shields, and somewhat moderate durability if they do. They're incredibly flexible. You can tailor them to be able to take out anything from armour to light infantry, and they've got good mobility options to get them where they need to go. So let's have a quick look at the ways that we can buff them up to give them every chance of making their charge and winning that charge. Firstly, we'll look at chapter traits, and we'll start with the Codex variants most famous of their Vanguard Veterans, the Raven Guard. Their chapter trait can benefit them as they're an infantry unit that might well easily get the -1 to hit for lurking in cover, and if they're getting mixed up in melee, then they might well get that +1 to hit and wound against characters. But it's mainly their stratagems that give them the biggest buff from this codex. Infiltrators can get a Raven Guard Van Vet squad up the board very quickly, as they can move before the game starts. The Raven's Blade can allow them to reroll a charge against a single unit, which could easily be the difference between making or failing a charge out of Deep Strike. Strike from the Skies can also add +1 to the charge distance and allows the unit to advance and charge as well, so it could be a good one to combine with Raven's Blade out of Deep Strike. And they also have some good synergy with Kavan Shrike himself, who will allow them to reroll charges when he's within 6 inches of them. Lots of good stratagems for making these guys reliably hit their targets, just as it should be, as we all know that Raven Guards really like their jump packs. Next on the list is White Scars, and I feel that these guys are just as powerful. Advance and Charge is a massive boon to a Vanguard Veteran squad, as it'll mean that they can very reliably hit units from a long way away. Also, being able to fall back and charge could really allow them to be a disruption tool, not allowing any enemy unit in their deployment zone feel safe, even when these guys are locked up fighting something very durable. The White Scars Super Doctrine, giving +1 damage in the Assault Doctrine, has the potential to be hilariously strong on these guys. If you took that dual chainsword squad for example, then they'd be hitting it AP -1 and having 2 damage apiece with 50+ attacks. They even have the opportunity to fight twice with Honour the Chapter, and with those bonuses alone they will do an average of 22 wounds, 2 toughness, 7 vehicles, and that's not even if they take any anti-vehicle weaponry. So these really will be a unit that will just blend anything. The White Scar stratagems are again incredibly helpful. They have a stratagem that I mentioned before to roll 3d6 and pick the 2 highest for a charge distance, allowing them to make very reliable charges out of Deep Strike, which is a big plus for these guys. They also synergise well with the Plume of the Plains Runner, a relic that can allow them to have +1 to charge, and I believe they also have a psychic power, whose name that I've forgotten, that will allow them a boosted charge too. White Scars will absolutely love their Vanguard Veterans, as they make some of the best use out of their entire chapter tactic and their boosted doctrine, and they can also hang off the board for 2 turns until that doctrine is in effect. A very, very strong combo there. I'll just quickly mention about successor chapters before we move on. If you didn't want either the Raven Guard's main chapter trait or the White Scars main chapter trait, you could swap them out for the combo of Whirlwind of Rage for extra hits on 6s, and the Hungry for Battle trait, which gives them +1 to advance and charge. Whirlwind of Rage typically adds a 25% boost to their damage output, which is very, very strong, and Hungry for Battle makes them more likely to make that all-important charge out of Deep Strike, and you can of course combine it with any of the other tricks in the White Scars or Raven Guard's books. So doing a successor chapter of either of those could be very nice on Vanguard Vets. I'll briefly mention Blood Angels as the third choice of Vanguard Vet squads. They have a 3d6 charge stratagem out of Deep Strike, which is amazing for getting them into the enemy when they need to. Their +1 to wound is great on all of the options that the Vanguard Veterans have to offer, and an exceptionally strong damage boost on all weapons. Blood Angels have a whole host of different characters that can buff jump pack units in various ways, such as the Sanguinor or the Names Chaplains, or Dante himself, but they do suffer the disadvantage of competing with Sanguinary Guard and Death Company for the role, both of whom are also very strong units. Vanguard Vets do have the option of taking Storm Shields everywhere though, which is a big plus in my book. Black Templars are another strong option for Vanguard Vets. They synergise almost perfectly with their chapter tactic, allowing them for a full rerollable charge out of Deep Strike, which is very, very important as that's the charge roll that could win or lose you games. You can't really afford to be failing charges with the Vanguard Vets, as they're too expensive a unit to have blown to bits by enemy firepower for no return. I'll be interested to see the different options that Black Templars get when they get their Psychic Awakening mini codex, and I'll be sure to cover them at the time. Other chapter options include Iron Hands, which will give them a little bit of boosted durability, and Salamanders, who will give them some nice rerolls on those fancy artisan weapons. Let's move on to buffing characters now, and Vanguard Vets are strong enough of a unit that you can afford to spend some points on buffing them. Obviously, Captains and Chapter Masters and Lieutenants will buff them in terms of rerolls to hit and wound. Chapter Masters could be particularly good if you're taking a bunch of Thunderhammers that only hit on 4s. You could definitely conceivably drop them in with jump packs next to the Vanguard Veteran squad, and perhaps try and use any similar charging tricks to get in on the enemy in a similar way. Say you could drop a White Scars Captain with the Plume of the Plains Runner, and then they'll both benefit from the boosted charge that'll give you. Shrike could also be used this way as well. Chaplains are another incredibly decent potential unit for Vanguard Veterans. Because of the way that the Litanies work at the moment, they would have to start on the board. So you could have a Chaplain with a jump pack, use his Litany of +2 to charge. He could move near where the Vanguard Veterans are about to drop. They could drop in, and hey presto, you've got a 7-inch charge. And if you've got some way of re-rolling the charge, like the Raven Guard or Black Templars can access, then you've got a very, very reliable charge indeed on your hands. If they don't happen to need that re-roll charge, then his Litany to re-roll all hits in close combat is pretty nice as well and will give them a huge damage boost. Some of the librarian spells can be very useful on a big unit of Vanguard Vets as well. There's quite a few decent ones from Codex to Codex. White Scars have some of the best powers, like I said, with the one that can give them boosted charges, and that can also prevent a unit from taking Overwatch, which is nice. Salamander's librarians could make them +1 toughness, and Raven Guard have an option to deny Overwatch from a unit, all of which are good things for Vanguard Veterans. In terms of relics, there are a few relics kicking about between the different supplement books that can give you +1 attacks. These are certainly worth considering when combined with the veterans. And now we'll take a quick look at some stratagems. Probably the most important one you'll ever use on Vanguard Vets is re-rolling a closely failed charge, because the difference between them getting in and blending an opponent and getting shot to death the next turn for no return is absolutely enormous. I'd certainly think about saving a command point for re-rolling their charge, if they're likely to need it. As we mentioned earlier, Honour the Chapter is potentially very powerful on a large close combat unit. It will cost you 3 command points, but that's likely command points well spent if you're using all of your fancy Thunderhammers and tooled up melee weapons all over again. If you are charging with a Vanguard Veteran squad that's 10 men, then you might consider using Hammer of Wrath, which is a 1 command point stratagem to inflict a mortal wound on a 5-up for every one of your models that ends within an inch of the enemy. If you do manage to get a full 10-man squad in, which isn't actually the easiest, then on average that you should get 3 mortal wounds from this, which actually isn't too bad for 1 command point. Do bear in mind though that if you're just going to murder your opponent anyway with all of your fancy close combat weapons, you may be doing a bit of redundant killing if the opponent is almost certainly going to die anyway. Finally, from the main book, we have Transhuman Physiology, which if they're going to be shot at by a bunch of strength 5 or better guns, could possibly allow them to hang on for a turn, or at least make your opponent squander a lot more firepower than they would really want to on that unit. That is 2 command points though, and you might have better uses for them. Obviously, all of the stratagems that boost charges and melee output from the supplement books are great, but there's a few too many to talk about right now, and we've talked about a few of them already. So how would I think about building the squad and fielding it on the tabletop then? Firstly, because of the Sergeant's amazing profile, I'd be very tempted to throw a Power Fist, Relic Blade or Thunderhammer on him at the very least. As Vanguard Vets, they are going to be wanting to charge the enemy, so it makes sense to upgrade your most powerful model with a decent bit of wargear, particularly as he should be fighting for the entire time that the squad's alive, because he should be the last one to die. Vanguard Veterans are usually a unit that I would take a full 10-man squad of, because then you can better synergise with character buffs, stratagems and psychic powers and the like that it might not be as worth using on a smaller squad. Also, in terms of Overwatch, if you lose 3 casualties out of a 10-man squad, you're still hitting with a bunch of Space Marines, but if you lose 3 casualties out of a 5-man squad, then you've likely not got a lot of killing power left on those last 2 models. For the rest of the squad, I'd have a few different options. I think I'd almost certainly always take 5 Storm Shields at least, so you can have some models to each those high impact shots and hopefully protect the rest of the squad from damage. I'd certainly not have too much against filling out the entire squad with Storm Shields, but it'd depend on whether or not you wanted to equip them with other fancy wargear and maybe chainswords as well. For example, you could have 5 cheap Vanguard Veterans with Storm Shield and Chainsword, and they can be the first ones to die, while you have a core of elite fighters with, say, a Power Fist and a Chainsword, absolutely going to town and maxing out their damage output. A typical take-all-comers loadout that I would recommend would be full 10 Storm Shields, 7 Marines with Chainswords, and 3 Marines with Thunderhammers, including that Sergeant. The Thunderhammers will be good for a good 6 wounds on any Leman Russ or Knight they charge, and the squad will have 31 attacks to put into hordes, which should put a big dent in them. With all those Storm Shields, the squad should be decently hard to remove, and even if they charge, say, a Knight or something like that, then odds are those Thunderhammers will live to swing again next turn. You'd also have the option of using Honour the Chapter to swing with the Thunderhammers again, if you thought it was important to kill whichever big heavy you were in combat with this turn. If you wanted the option of bringing them down turn 1 in a drop pod, then that would work equally well too. I think if you were investing this amount of points in a unit, incidentally this loadout is 210, then you'd be wanting to make sure that they get into the enemy lines by one of the chapter specific stratagems, or by using a chaplain, or by any combination of the methods we've already mentioned. So how would I use this squad on the battlefield? Firstly, it would vary a little bit depending on the matchup I was facing and which Space Marine army I was playing as. If I was playing Vanguard, I'd be very tempted to keep them on the board, to move them up with their infiltrate stratagem, and have a good chance at a first turn charge without even having to deep strike. If I was starting them on the board, I'd want to keep them out of line of sight when I deploy them, and then use their good manoeuvrability and hugging cover to keep them safe as they moved up the board, and jump on any targets of opportunity. If I was deploying them from deep strike to come in turn 2 or turn 3, I'd be looking to jump down, perhaps with character support, perhaps into the radius of a chaplain, hopefully make that charge, decimate whatever units that they have attacked, and then certainly look to have the option of piling into other enemy units to lock them up from shooting, or if the opportunity arose, to try pointing an enemy model from another unit by wrapping them round with 3 models, so the enemy unit could not fall back and then the rest of the enemy couldn't shoot at the Vanguard Veterans. In some matchups you might be playing against armies that don't have much shooting and will be coming towards you. In that case I'd certainly think about starting them on the board as a counter-attack unit, let the opponent come towards you and have the Vanguard Veterans pounce on them and get the charge hopefully, when they draw near. If you're playing against a gun line, you'd have to think very carefully about how and where you brought them in, and think about the options. Say if you don't make the charge, are they going to be safe? If you do make the charge, will they be able to consolidate into cover or into contact with other units? As if you do manage to put them in some way that the enemy can't shoot them, that could be the difference between winning or losing a game, as your very fighty Space Marine squad could butcher through the rest of the army with ease in the next turn. So overall, I think that Vanguard Veterans are a highly effective unit, but they have to be used very carefully because they're really not that tough to enemy firepower, and if you do leave them hanging out in the wind or they fail their charge, then you're going to be throwing a lot of points down the drain for no good reason. I think they're exceptionally brutal in White Scars, Blood Angels or Vanguard, as each of those chapters gives them interesting and scary benefits that would make them a force to reckon with on the tabletop. Another option you could consider if you're using Vanguard Veterans is using deep striking Terminators instead. Obviously they're far slower, but could be a bit tougher against anti-infantry firepower with their 2-up save, and of course you get a whole ton of Stormbolters to shoot at the enemy, which is a plus. I don't think that either unit is necessarily better, they just do slightly different things when they drop in. Let me know your opinions and experience down below if you've used Vanguard Veterans yourself, and of course let me know if I've made any rules errors with the video. They're quite a complicated unit, and we've talked about a lot of stratagems from a lot of codexes in this video. As always, thank you very much for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll hopefully see you guys next time.